In today's podcast, we're going to talk about an improvisational method by Lee Konitz, the famous saxophone player.
Welcome to Jazz Guitar Lessons, where we help guitarists learn jazz faster, express themselves more fluently, and have fun along the way. My name is Mark, and if you're looking to learn jazz, form better practice habits, and especially if you enjoy a French accent, make sure to subscribe.
Lee Konitz was perhaps one of the best jazz improvisers of the 20th century and still in the 21st century. So here's the backstory about this podcast. There's a blog post, there's a page on jazzguitarlessons.net that you can find at this URL, jazzguitarlessons.net/Lee-Konitz, that's KONITZ.html, where I took a method that was first published in a magazine. It was probably Downbeat, where he describes 10 steps, or as he's saying, 10 gradients of improvisation, how to start from the melody and then wind up playing pure solo, pure your own improvisational ideas, right? So I wrote this blog post probably about 5 years ago. It's really interesting. What happens is I was listening to a Kenny Wheeler album that I highly recommend. It's called Angel Song. And there was a saxophone solo that it took me to a very interesting emotional place. It's very well done. It sounds great. It's very thorough. It's very thoughtful, and it's very beautiful. And I said, "Who's that? Who's playing the saxophone?" And it's Lee Konitz, right? Born in 1927, and an American jazz composer. He's from Chicago, and he's one of the few guys that was a contemporary to the other bebop guys such as Charlie Parker. And that didn't sound like bebop. They didn't sound the same. So there's other players like him, such as Paul Desmond, Art Pepper. They were strongly influenced by Lee Konitz's approach. So what can we learn from this is really what you can find. The PDF, the examples on the page are transcribed directly from Lee's writing. Of course, it was written for the saxophone at first, so I took the liberty of doing it for guitar, right? So it's on All the Things You Are. It's a tune that I take as an example a lot in the blog posts on the website, on the videos, or during my private lessons, because it's a timeless progression. Everybody knows that tune, and everybody's still playing it to improvise. So recently, about a week ago, I received an email on jazzguitarlessons.net, and somebody asked me to maybe do a podcast and specify the steps that are found on the page, on the blog post, because the page is, I guess, as I'm looking at it right now, is, I guess, 800 words or so, maybe 1,000 words. And this is, really what's happening. I don't have enough space when I'm writing a blog post to be very specific in the exercise. So here we go. We're going to cover the first the 10 gradients of improvisation. But first, I have this other idea. I read interviews and stuff about Lee Konitz, and if you're a total beginner, you might want to just try that. It's going to be enough for you for now. Take a tune. That's before the 10 steps for improvisation. Just first you look at a tune, you're like, what's happening? Take a separate sheet of paper, write the chord progression on it only, then play whole notes. So say it's the tunes in 4/4, like All the Things You Are. You're only allowed to play notes within the chord. So you're only allowed to play 1, 3, 5, and 7, and then you run through the chord progression in this way by tapping your foot or with the metronome at a slow tempo. You do this playing only one note per bar until you've memorized the chord progression, until you don't have to look at the chord symbols anymore. It will happen automatically if you just have your eyes on the piece of paper all the time. That's going to happen. That's what happens to me anyways. So then after you can do that with one note per bar, the second step is to do it with 2 notes per bar. You're playing half notes, and still you're only allowed to play chord tones, 1, 3, 5, and 7. And the third step, you've guessed it, you play quarter notes, like a walking bass, but only on the good arpeggio notes. Then only do you allow yourself to improvise for real with 8 notes and triplets and whatnot. So that's a little Lee Konitz secret that's not part of the blog post and part of the 10 gradients for improv, but I think it makes a lot of sense. All right. So let's get going into the gradients for improvisation. That was, as I'm looking at this right now, the blog post on my computer, I think it was published in the mid-90s or so in Downbeat. And The first gradient is basically play the melody. So there's nothing around it. You're not adding, you're not subtracting, so no brainer. Second gradient is where you want to identify the target notes. So what you can do is to ornament a little bit, but you don't ornament too much, meaning that you would play the melody and you would displace it a little bit, a little bit before, a little bit after. So it would be likely that second gradient is how you would play the melody to all the things you are on a gig. You would not just play it bare bone as it's written, because it's da 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 da. So this is boring, right? So you would modify it. That's kind of second gradient. You can move the melody around. That's really what I meant when I wrote down. You can shorten the duration or elongate the duration to fit different things in between, but always play the most important notes of the melody. You keep playing them.
Hey everyone, just a quick break here. If you're loving this episode and you want to elevate your own jazz guitar skills, reach out to us. We've guided thousands of guitarists in becoming accomplished jazzers beyond their wildest dreams. So check the link in the description or visit jazzguitarlessons.net to get started today. Okay, now back to the episode.
Now, third step. And that's probably where your nose is going to start to bleed. You can start to use different devices to add neighbor tones, as I wrote in the blog post, mostly diatonic. So it's almost like step 2, but you have way more ornaments. But we still hear the melody, but you allow yourself to go in and add notes in between, more so than in second step. In the second step, it's like, as I told you, you play the melody on a gig, you play around it a little bit, but not too much. But third step would be like, if you play like that on a gig when it's the time to play the melody, you would be pushing your luck. Imagine what would be too much ornaments so that people kind of think it's a solo, but you still hear the melody in the middle of it. That's third gradient, really. Now, step 4. I wrote in the blog post, you can maybe follow along or look at the PDF while you listen to this podcast. Step 2 and 3 are hard to differentiate. Not for me personally, because I know I kind of practiced it and I know what the big idea here. But fourth gradient, there's no problem or anything. There's no distinction to make between the third and the fifth. Fourth gradient is the first time you allow yourself playing 8 notes. So you're using the guide tones, you're using the important notes of the melody, but you're playing a stream of 8 notes that use the important notes. So it's like step 3, where you systematically play 8 notes in between. So you may have to end your line on a melody note, or it may be maybe the melody will be buried inside a melodic line. So this is, for me, it's really straightforward. If you know the melody well, you know the scale around it well, it will come. So maybe about 80 or 90% of the jazz guitarists that I teach or that I work with through jazzguitarlessons.net, I guess that the fourth gradient is where we have all the work to do. And as you go into the 5th, 6th, and 7th and 8th gradient, it's more for advanced players, as you will be able to tell, because just to execute a stream of 8-note lines and then have a stream of 8-note lines that's based off the melody requires quite a bit of technique, and it requires also that you know your instrument, and it requires, it's kind of a good thing to do, fourth gradient. And you should be looking to improve and get your 5th gradient going on. So here's another hard to make distinction. 5th gradient is like still having your 8th note that you get that passes through all the melody, but you are allowed to displace the melody notes. That's really the big takeaway. They don't have to be, how we said step 1, this is your basic melody. Step 2, you kind of displace the notes. Well, same thing with step 4 and 5. Step 4, you have all the ornaments around the melody. In step 5, you're allowed to move the melody around, and you're allowed to make way more chromaticism or arpeggios to outline what you're going through. This is cool because now you're starting to not hear the melody because it's so displaced or it's so buried inside your line. That would be fifth gradient. So think of 4 and 5 as the same thing as 1 and 2, but with more of course, with more stuff around it. Step 6 is really where you can start to think of extensions, but not necessarily alterations. So the first thing to note that Lee is saying in the article is you put more importance on the non-target notes, non-melody notes. It's like your own thing is becoming more important for the first time. It's like the halfway point. The fifth step, the target note, the melody note were still the most important. In the sixth gradient, it's like, well, your ornaments take over, as I said in the blog post. And it can be built from higher extension. You use your 9ths and your 13th, 6th, or whatever. That's a really interesting one. And step 7 just takes it further by saying, we want step 6, but now you're allowed to use the like the crunchy notes, the flat 9, the sharp 9, you're allowed to use the notes that are outside to have even more chromaticism. So 6 and 7 are pairs. You see, you probably notice those exercises, they kind of come into pairs. So you say 1 and 2 is the same as 4 and 5, and then 6 and 7, they're grouped together. There's a slight difference. But you see, if you do, you heard me do step 6, and I have a melody that's kind of buried that I accord. There's less importance on the melody and target notes, and then I go to 7, and I do the exact same thing, but I'll pass the flat 9 or flat 13 or extension or alteration when I have a chance to do it. You'll hear the difference. It's going to sound outer. It's going to sound more out if you want. 8th gradient. So we only have 8, 9, and 10 to go. This is the 8th gradient is the step where I think you, as I wrote in the blog post, you listen to Jim Hall and those guys that tend to develop smaller ideas, and that's really where it stands. So the melody is still there, but it's not very obvious. Sometimes you hear Pat Metheny do that also. It's like he will tell you in an interview, oh, I'm still using that idea. I'm still using this interval or this motif. But there's so much stuff around it that only Pat knows what he's using it as his inspiration for creating lines, right? So that's the 8th gradient. It's like, you know the melody super well. You've been ornamenting around it and adding chromatics and scales and stuff and arpeggios and alterations. Now it's kind of, it might not even be there. Or if people will transcribe your solo, they'll be like, we don't have a lot of traces of the melody, but if we look for it, we may find it. That's it. And the 9th gradient of improv is one, well, I don't really get, because I think there could have been 8 or 9 gradients, but the 9th gradient is almost no reference to the original melody anymore, just your own thing. And then this is kind of where, can I distinguish if somebody's on 8th, 9th, or 10th? I can't tell you. I couldn't make it up unless I practiced it. And that's the big takeaway. It's probably more what's happening in your mind while you're improvising that's important. If you say, I'm doing step 8, I'm doing this on purpose, then you're doing step 9. You try to do things differently instead of mindlessly running through changes or scales or licks that you already know. So as I wrote in the blog post, this is mind over matter, right? And then the 10th gradient, Lee Konitz, just no example, he just writes down by hand an act of pure inspiration. So I think you know where it's going. It's just once you're in the moment, you hear something, you follow it, and that's what it is. So to wrap up this podcast, number 26, thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this. I know it's been a long ride and there's a lot of me rambling. I hope it answers your question. For the person that asked about this podcast, for me to make this podcast, and just to quote something I wrote on the page again, melody is king. This Lee Konitz exercise is just going to help you have more thoughtful, more better, more intense, more focused lines. Because as jazz improvisers, sometimes all we do is like, okay, here's B-flat blues. Here's my usual beefs to my flat 9 arpeggios, this and that and that. This is a really nice opportunity to say, okay, it's my turn to take a solo. let me take a step back and not do the same old thing anymore. I want to be inspired and feel something and have the listeners feel something. So I hope this helps. I'll see you soon on jazzguitarlessons.net. Improve your jazz guitar playing with a real teacher. Take care.